So we have Dr. Carl Hart here, who is the Ziff professor and former chair of the Department of Psychology at Columbia University. He has published hundreds of articles on neuropsychopharmacology, long word. His areas of research include the study of behavioral and neuropharmacological effects of psychoactive drugs in humans. Dr. Carl is a co-author of Drugs, Society, and Human Behavior, and he has his most recent book entitled Drug Use for Grown-Ups, Chasing Liberty in the Land of Fear, both of which are personal must-reads. So let's welcome to the stage Dr. Carl Hart.
Thank you, Mon. Can you hear me okay? Is everything good? We're all good.
Yeah.
Well, welcome everybody into this bizarre world. We're all located in our own individual spaces and pretending that we're together. Okay, so I'll play along. So can I have my slides up, please? Okay. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about a few common myths about drugs and drug use, and I hope that it sets the tone for the conference. And so as we go about our next few days, we will all have a baseline starting place. One of the sort of pervasive myths about drugs is that any use of any of the banned substances from shabu to heroin, any use of those substances means that the person is addicted. That's a myth. One of the things that we know is that drug addiction is defined by psychosocial disruptions. And the second component is that the person who is experiencing drug addiction is disturbed by those disruptions. At least that's how the DSM-5 or the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association defines it. And what I have on the slide are the symptoms that one must endorse in order to meet criteria for addiction. The symptoms are, if you endorse 2 to 3 symptoms, you meet criteria for a mild disorder. If you endorse 4 or 5, you meet criteria for a moderate disorder. If you endorse 6 or more, then you have a severe substance use disorder or drug addiction. I will use those 2 terms interchangeably. Now, just as I pointed out, just merely endorsing these symptoms, say if you endorse 3 symptoms, but you are not distressed by those sort of effects, it doesn't mean that you meet criteria for substance use disorder or addiction. The second component, meaning that you have to be distressed by these symptoms, is required. Because we can think about someone, who say they fail to meet family functions, important family functions like dinner at Thanksgiving or dinner at Christmas. You can imagine someone who may have has a family who are big Trump supporters, and they fail to meet Christmas dinner, they fail to meet at Thanksgiving, and they fail to meet other sort of family settings because they don't want to talk about Donald Trump, because they don't necessarily like Donald Trump. And instead, they might choose to use a substance while the other family members are meeting. It doesn't mean that they meet criteria for that symptom, because that person may be making a rational choice. I don't like your politics, so I'm not showing up. So it's important that not only do they endorse the symptom, but they are distressed by this sort of symptom or this disruption. So that's important. And we determine whether or not someone meets criteria for addiction is by these symptoms and by whether or not they are distressed, and not by the drug that they're using or the amount of the drug that they're using. And so I hope people understand that. Next slide, please. Thank you. And the next myth deals with most people who most people who use drugs meet criteria for drug addiction. That's a belief that many people have, but that's a myth. Most people who use drugs do not meet criteria for drug addiction. In fact, 70 to 90% of people who use drugs don't have a drug addiction problem. These people are responsible people. They are important members of their community. They donate their time, their money, effort. They are responsible. They are upstanding citizens. The vast majority of people who use drugs. I know sometimes you see on the movies or in films or on your news, people who use drugs, they are having all kinds of problems, but you need to understand that that's a select group of people who are using drugs. And sure, there are people who meet criteria. As much as 30% of the people who use drugs will develop a substance use disorder or addiction. But it's important to remember that the vast majority never will. Now, if the vast majority of people never will meet criteria for drug addiction, it's important. That's important information for us because it tells us that most people who use the substance don't meet criteria for addiction. Then we have to look beyond the drug when we're thinking about treating the person. Because if it was solely the drug, then everyone would meet criteria who uses the drug. So this information tells us we have to look beyond the drug when we're thinking about treating people's drug addiction. One of the things that we know is that things like co-occurring mental disorders and co-occurring physical illnesses are important information because a number of people may have depression and they may be self-medicating to treat their depression. And so this is manifesting like a drug addiction. Other people may have physical pain, for example, and they're taking a great deal of opioids and they are putting themselves in harm's way in order to get the opioids. But if you treat the mental disorder or the physical disorder, the addiction would also be resolved in many cases or certainly improved. Another reason, another important thing as it relates to addiction is this issue of poverty. Poverty in resources, poverty in education and information. This goes with drug addiction as well. This is highly correlated with drug addiction. And also another factor that's important for us to think about is when we subject people to unrealistic expectation. And when you do such a thing, particularly when you do this chronically, this could lead people to have drug-related problems. And so you want to make sure people are not subjected to unrealistic expectations on a chronic basis, like having to take care of your entire extended family when you're such a young person. That's an unrealistic expectation. And then there are other reasons for addiction. And if we focus on these issues, then we will go a long way in treating drug addiction, as opposed to simply focusing on the substance itself. When we focus on the substance itself, then we're not treating the whole person. Then we're not taking into account the person's environment, the person's personal struggles, the person's stress. All of these sort of factors are critically important when we're thinking about treating addiction. Now, this particular myth seems to have so much energy. That is, drug addiction is a brain disease. That's a myth, by the way, particularly when we think about the data. When we think about the data collected in humans, there is virtually no data collected in humans to support that position. But it doesn't seem to stop an entire field of saying that drug addiction is a brain disease. Here on the slide, I have a paper that we published reviewing the literature, carefully looking at all of the literature to see if we can find evidence of human drug addiction being a brain disease. We couldn't. Next slide, please. This notion that drug addiction is a brain disease is potentially dangerous. It's potentially dangerous because what it allows us to do, what we do essentially, is that we exaggerate the harmful effects on the brain by saying that drug addiction is a brain disease. And when we exaggerate these harmful effects on the brain, it allows us to have these repressive, unrealistic policies in which we go after people for using small or any amounts of these drugs, and then we destroy their lives, we destroy their families' lives, and all because of this lie that we perpetuated. Now, when I say that drug addiction, there is no evidence in humans to show that drug addiction is a brain disease, I just want to have a comparison with two well-known brain disease, Huntington's disease and Parkinson's disease. When we think about these two disorders, what we know is that these disorders are progressive, means once it starts, it doesn't stop. They're irreversible and they're fatal. People die from these diseases. And in both cases with these diseases, you can see brain damage. You can see striatal or cells in the striatum atrophying. That is the loss of cells. You see this progressive loss of cells as the disorder manifests, clinically manifests. Now, when we think about drug addiction, the majority of the patients recover without any medical or treatment. So it's not progressive, it's not irreversible, and it's not necessarily fatal. Another important point is that there are no neural correlates, that is, no brain sort of evidence that is associated with drug addiction, like there is with Huntington's disease and Parkinson's disease. The fifth myth is that people take drugs, or most people take drugs, because they are in pain. Certainly, there are a number of people who take drugs because they are in pain. That is absolutely true. But the majority of people don't take drugs because they're in pain or because of they're self-medicating. The majority of people who use drugs do so because they like the way the drugs feel. They think about your caffeine use. You take caffeine because you want to be alert in the morning. Like for this conference, for example, if you're in the Far East, you want to be alert in the morning. Or why you take alcohol. You take alcohol because you like the effects and you want to relax or relieve anxiety or chill. Those are the same reasons why people take other drugs like amphetamines or heroin. The same reason. So we don't have to pathologize people simply because they have chosen to use a drug. And I make this point so we will have a better understanding that the folks who choose to use a drug doesn't necessarily mean that they are suffering from some psychopathology. It could be a rational sort of choice. People like to feel good. Some drugs make people feel good. That's not a stretch. So the question that I like to leave you with is this question. It's an important question as it relates to myth number 5. Why then are you or other people in our society disturbed by what others choose to put in their bodies? Why is our society up in arms when people choose to put drugs in their body? Especially when those people are not bothering anyone else, especially when those folks are not engaged in some criminal activity. We have laws to deal with criminal activity. If the person is just relaxing in the private comfort of their own home, why are you upset? Why is our society upset? that's a question I'd like to leave you all with as you go about meeting in this conference. And with that, I just like to say thank you for listening in this bizarre world that we have. I hope you're all out there listening, because it says that there are 20,000 people listening. So I hope you're all listening, and have a good conference.